I was just a farmer. Then the alien warrior challenged me to a duel. I never wanted trouble. My days were spent in the quiet hum of my farm on Alara 9, far from the chaos I'd once known. But when she came, everything changed. A deadly alien warrior, clad in silver armor and glowing with an eerie power, appeared in my fields and challenged me to a duel. She came for a fight, but she didn't expect what happened next. I fought wars before, but I'm no longer that man. Or at least, that's what I told myself. Now she's here, forced to stay after losing, and I can't shake the feeling that her presence is stirring something I thought was long buried. The question is, what exactly am I running from? And why did I leave it all behind? The answer lies in the past I've buried, one she's determined to uncover, whether I like it or not. If you want to find out what happens next, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to my channel for more. You don't want to miss the rest of this story. Trust me. On the distant world of Alara 9, where 3 moons hung like shimmering pearls against an endless indigo sky, Jasper Kane carved out a solitary existence amid fields of crimson splendor. The soil here was unlike anything he'd ever known, a deep, radiant red that glowed under the triple moonlight as though kissed by the embers of forgotten stars. It clung to his calloused hands, rough and real, a stark contrast to the cold steel of the warships he'd once commanded. Jasper wasn't a man given to poetry, but there was something about this land that stirred him, a quiet beauty that whispered of redemption. He bent low over the humming bulk of his ancient harvester, a relic he'd bartered for from a grizzled trader at the edge of the galaxy. Its engine growled like an old beast roused from slumber, protesting with every turn of its rusted gears. But Jasper knew its ways. A firm tap here, a smear of grease there, and soon it purred obediently, slicing through the tall, dusty stalks of grain that reached his chest. His hands, tanned and scarred from years of war, moved with practiced ease across the controls. A faded cotton shirt clung to his broad frame, sweat tracing dark rivers down his back, highlighting the top muscles he no longer wielded in battle. Once, Jasper had been a name that struck fear into the hearts of foes. Kane, the destroyer of Iron Valley, a mercenary captain who'd led his ragtag crew through the blood-soaked chaos of the galactic wars. But that was a lifetime ago. Now, at 34, he sought only to bury the echoes of plasma blasts, the stench of burning wreckage, and the hollow gazes of men who'd fallen under his command. This modest farm, nestled in a valley framed by low hills and a forest of ashen thorn trees, was his sanctuary, a place where he could mend himself, piece by jagged piece. That afternoon, as the second sun of Alara 9 dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in fiery hues of amber and gold, a strange sound pierced the stillness. It wasn't the rustle of the wind through the grain or the mournful cry of the 2-headed birds he'd dubbed song weavers. No, this was sharper, footsteps, swift and deliberate, cutting through his field like a blade through silk. Jasper straightened, wiping the sweat from his brow with the back of his hand, and peered into the distance. A figure emerged from the haze of the horizon, slender yet commanding, moving with a grace that belied its speed. The fading light caught on a suit of silver armor, glinting with every step, tracing the contours of a body both lithe and lethal. As the stranger drew closer, Jasper's breath hitched. She wasn't human. Her skin shimmered a deep jade, like polished stone underwater, and her eyes burned a fierce crimson, twin flames set against the dusk. A cascade of ash-gray hair flowed behind her, wild and unbound, catching the wind like a storm-tossed banner. She halted 10 paces from him, her hand resting on the hilt of a curved blade that sang faintly as she drew it, a weapon as beautiful as it was deadly. "You are Kane, the destroyer of Iron Valley?" Her voice cut through the air, sharp as a shard of ice yet threaded with a strange, melodic undertone, like bells echoing in a cavern. Jasper's brow furrowed, a flicker of surprise crossing his weathered face before he masked it with calm. He leaned against the harvester, his tone low and steady, edged with a dry humor born of too many hard years. "There's just a farmer here, lady. If you're looking for a fight, at least let me offer you a drink first. It's a scorcher out there." She tilted her head, those crimson eyes raking over him from head to toe, as if weighing his worth in a single glance. Then, without a word, she surged forward, swift as a gale. Her blade arced through the air, aimed straight for his chest, a silver blur against the red earth. But Jasper was no stranger to death's dance. Instincts, dormant but never dead, flared to life. He rolled aside, his hand snatching the hoe propped nearby, a simple tool for turning soil, and raised it just in time to meet her strike. Metal clashed against metal, sparks flaring bright in the twilight. In a heartbeat, he twisted his grip, channeling the strength of his shoulders into a single, fluid motion. The hoe hooked her blade and sent it spinning from her grasp, embedding itself in the dirt a few yards away. She stumbled, landing hard on the crimson ground, her armor shifting to reveal the lean curve of her legs and the taut line of her waist. Jasper stood tall, chest heaving, his gaze locked on her. Up close, she was striking, wild and dangerous, her form a paradox of strength and allure. His throat tightened as his eyes lingered a moment too long on the sweep of her thighs, then snapped back to her face. "You're stronger than I expected," she said, her breath ragged not from pain, but from sheer astonishment. She pushed herself up, her body taut beneath the armor, every movement accentuating the lines of muscle and grace that her gear could barely contain. Jasper drove the hoe into the earth beside him, a faint smirk tugging at his lips as he met her stare. "You lost. So what now? Head home, or stay for supper. How about a mean dusk rain stew if you're game?" She didn't answer immediately, her crimson gaze holding his, a spark of something new flickering within it. Not anger, but a curious, reluctant admiration. Her name was Zara, a huntress of the Vera, a proud, enigmatic race from the galaxy's edge, known for their unmatched prowess in battle and a fierce devotion to honor. She had crossed stars to find Jasper, drawn by tales of Kane, the destroyer of Iron Valley, a man said to have felled legions of Crixen with nothing but grit and a plasma rifle. Yet here he stood, not a warrior cloaked in glory, but a farmer dusted in red soil, his hands more accustomed to seed than steel. Her defeat at his hands, a simple hoe against her blade, had shattered her purpose. By Vera law, a vanquished challenger could not return home. They must wander in exile or forge a new path. "I cannot go back," she said that first evening, her voice steady but her crimson eyes shadowed with something like loss. They sat on the worn steps of Jasper's porch, the air thick with the scent of dusk-grain stalks and the faint hum of night insects. Above them, the 3 moons of Alara, 9 cast a silver glow, bathing the fields in an otherworldly light. Jasper scratched the back of his neck, unsure what to do with this fierce creature who'd stormed into his quiet life. Killing her wasn't an option. He'd spilled enough blood to last a lifetime. After a long silence, he shrugged, his tone rough but earnest. "This place is big enough, and I could use a hand. Stay if you want. I won't promise to teach you how to fight, but I can show you how to grow something that doesn't bite back." Zara's gaze lingered on him, searching for mockery or pity, but found neither. She nodded once, a curt gesture that sealed an unspoken pact. And so, she stayed, not out of desire, but because the void of exile left her no other shore to drift toward. The days that followed wove a strange rhythm between them. Jasper rose with the first sun, his boots crunching against the crimson earth as he tended the fields. Zara trailed him, her silver armor glinting incongruously amid the swaying grain. He taught her the ways of the dusk grain, a native crop with stalks as tall as a man and seeds that shimmered like tiny pearls. His rough hands brushed hers as he showed her how to angle the hoe, how to press the seeds into the soil just deep enough to take root. Each touch was fleeting, accidental, a spark against the dry tinder of their proximity. Her skin, jade and smooth, radiated a warmth that caught him off guard, stirring something dormant in his chest. Zara, for her part, watched him with a hunter's keenness. She noted the flex of his arms beneath the thin cotton of his shirt as he hefted sacks of grain, the way sweat traced the hard lines of his jaw when the suns climbed high. She masked her curiosity behind a cool facade, but there were moments, brief, unguarded, when her crimson eyes softened, tracing him as if he were a puzzle she couldn't quite solve. One afternoon, the heat of Alara, 9 pressed down like a living thing, heavy and unrelenting. They knelt side by side near the irrigation trench, wrestling with a leaking pipe that sprayed water in erratic bursts. Jasper gripped the rusted metal, his knuckles white, while Zara twisted the valve with a precision that spoke of her warrior's training. Without warning, the pipe buckled and a jet of cold water erupted, soaking them both. His shirt clung to his chest, outlining the plains of muscle honed by years of survival. Zara's armor, thin and form-fitting, glistened as water traced its edges, molding it tighter against her curves. The swell of her hips, the dip of her waist, the faint rise of her chest beneath the silver plates. Jasper jolted upright, turning away as heat crept up his neck. "Sorry, didn't mean for that," he muttered, his voice rougher than he intended, eyes fixed on the horizon to avoid the sight of her. Zara stayed kneeling for a moment, water dripping from her ash-gray hair, plastering it to her cheeks. She tilted her head, a rare smile tugging at her lips, small, almost teasing. "You blush, Kane. Have you never seen a huntress drench before?" Her words hung in the air, light but edged with something that made his pulse quicken. He fumbled for a reply, settling on a gruff, grab a rag, before stalking off toward the shed. Behind him, her laugh rang out, clear and bright, like the chime of glass in the wind. It followed him, tugging at the corners of his mind, a sound he hadn't known he'd been craving. That night, the moons rose full and luminous, their light pooling across the farm like liquid silver. Jasper climbed onto the slanted roof of his makeshift barn, a place he'd taken to sitting when the days grew long. He carried a bottle of homemade grain liquor, its bite sharp enough to warm the bones, and 2 clay cups chipped from use. Zara followed, her movements silent and sure, settling beside him with the grace of a predator at rest. He poured the amber liquid, handing her a cup. "Can you handle this?" he asked, half a challenge in his tone as he raised his own drink. "The Zara do not shy from spirits," she replied, taking the cup and sipping without hesitation. The liquor's heat flickered in her eyes, narrowing them for a heartbeat, and Jasper watched, transfixed, as her tongue brushed the rim, catching a stray drop. Her lips, full and faintly blue against her jade skin, held his gaze longer than he meant to let them. They talked as the night deepened. Zara spoke of her people, of floating cities adrift on oceans of gas, of trials where warriors clashed to prove their worth and claim companionship. Her voice, usually clipped and commanding, softened as she recounted the rituals, the way strength was both a gift and a bond. "And when they win?" Jasper asked, his voice dropping low, roughened by the liquor and the weight of her nearness. His eyes lingered on her mouth, the curve of it stirring a heat he couldn't name. "They bind themselves," she said, her crimson gaze meeting his, steady and unyielding. In the deepest way, a flicker passed through her eyes, not defiance, but an invitation, subtle as the brush of a blade's edge. Jasper's breath caught, a flush creeping up his throat. He leaned closer, just a fraction, the space between them shrinking. "Sounds like a fight worth having," he said, his grin crooked, testing the waters. Zara's smile returned, faint but real, and she set her cup down on the roof's edge. Her hand moved, resting beside his, their fingers brushing, a touch so light it might have been the wind, yet neither pulled away. The air thickened, charged with an unspoken pull, a thread stretched taut between them. For a moment, they sat there, suspended in the silver glow, 2 souls from distant worlds daring to linger at the edge of something new. The fragile peace Jasper and Zara had woven over days of shared labor and quiet nights shattered on a morning when the sky above Alara, 9 trembled. A low, guttural roar rolled through the valley, Not the familiar hum of wind or the distant cry of song weavers, but something mechanical, alien, and foreboding. Jasper stepped out onto the porch, his boots scuffing the weathered wood, a mug of bitter-root tea steaming in his hand. Above the crimson fields, a sleek, angular ship descended, its hull glinting like obsidian under the triple suns. Dust swirled in its wake, a storm born of engines rather than nature. Zara emerged behind him, her silver armor catching the light as she strapped her curved blade to her hip. Her crimson eyes narrowed, scanning the craft with a hunter's instinct. "Visitors?" she asked, her voice low, edged with suspicion. "Not the friendly kind," Jasper muttered, setting the mug down with a clink. His gut twisted, a soldier's intuition stirring from its long slumber. He'd seen ships like that before, Alliance vessels, cold and efficient, built for war and command. The ship touched down at the edge of his fields, its ramp hissing open to reveal a trio of figures in crisp gray uniforms. Leading them was a woman, tall and wiry, her steel-colored hair cropped short and her face etched with the hard lines of authority. She strode forward with purpose, her boots kicking up red dust, flanked by two younger officers whose hands hovered near holstered pistols. Jasper met her halfway, Zara at his side, her presence a silent promise of strength. "Kane," the woman said, her voice clipped and devoid of warmth. "I'm Commander Laura Voss, Alliance Recon Division. We need you back." Jasper's jaw tightened, memories clawing their way to the surface, screams echoing in the Iron Valley, the wet snap of Crixon limbs under his boots, the faces of men he couldn't save. He crossed his arms, his stance rooted like the thorn trees beyond the farm. "I'm done with your wars, Voss. Find someone else to bleed for you." Laura's lips thinned, but she didn't flinch. "This isn't about war. It's about survival. The Crixon are back, and they're coming here." The name hit him like a punch to the chest. Crixon, parasitic monstrosities he'd fought a decade ago, insectoid horrors with chitin shells harder than steel and claws that tore through armor like paper. He'd buried them in the Iron Valley, collapsing a reactor to trap their hive, but the cost had been steep. Nearly his entire squad, their blood staining his hands in nightmares that never faded. "They're gone," he said, more to himself than her, his voice rough. "I ended them." "They adapted," Laura countered, her eyes cold and unyielding. "They've scavenged tech from the wrecks we left behind. Ships, weapons, everything. Now they're spaceborne, and they've locked onto Alaranine. The Z-12 in your soils drawing them like moths to a flame." Zara stepped forward, her head tilting as she studied Laura. "What are these Crixon?" she asked, her tone calm, but laced with a warrior's curiosity. "Nightmares," Laura replied, glancing at her with a flicker of appraisal. "A hive mind species that consumes planets, soil, plants, flesh, to multiply. They evolve fast, and with Z-12, they'll be unstoppable. They'll turn this rock into a breeding ground in weeks." Jasper's gaze drifted to the fields, the red earth he'd tamed with sweat and stubborn hope. He'd built this place to escape the past, not to watch it burn again. "And you think I can stop them?" he asked, his voice low, bitter. "You did it before," Laura said. "No one else knows their patterns like you do. We got a ship in orbit, the Eclipse. Come with us, or this farm, and everything on it dies." Zara's hand brushed his arm, a touch so light it might have been accidental, but grounded him. He met her eyes, crimson and steady, and saw a question there. Not doubt, but a silent offer. "I'm not doing this alone," he said, turning back to Laura. "Zara comes with me. Equal rank, equal say. No negotiation." Laura's brow arched, her gaze flicking between them, noting the unspoken bond. "A Vera Huntress? Unorthodox, but your call. If she can fight, she's in." We lift off in an hour. The Eclipse loomed in orbit like a steel predator, its corridors gleaming with sterile light and buzzing with the hum of machinery. Jasper traded his farmer's garb for an Alliance tactical suit, lighter than the heavy armor of his mercenary days, but still stiff against his skin. Zara kept her silver armor, its sleek lines a stark contrast to the uniformity around her. They were ushered to the war room, a chamber alive with flickering holograms and the murmur of officers plotting doom. At the center stood a tactical display, a glowing map of Alara, 9 orbited by 3 jagged red blips, Crixan ships, closing fast. Laura briefed them. The creatures had detected the Z-12, a rare mineral buried deep in the planet's crust, a catalyst that accelerated their grotesque evolution. "They'll hit the surface in 3 days," she said, her finger jabbing the hologram. "We need a plan." Jasper leaned over the table, his mind shifting gears from farmer to tactician. "We use the Z-12 against them," he said, tracing a line across the map. "Bait them into the narrow valley east of my farm. Bottle them up, then hit them with orbital fire." Zara nodded, her voice cutting through the room's tension. "The Vera trap prey this way, tight formations to funnel them, then a killing strike. I'll shape the ground teams to hold the line." Their eyes met across the table, a spark of understanding passing between them. They worked in tandem, his raw adaptability weaving with her disciplined precision. He sketched out a loose perimeter, leaving room for improvisation, while she tightened it into a grid of coordinated points. The officers watched, some with skepticism, others with grudging respect. At one point, they stood shoulder to shoulder, poring over the display. Zara's breath grazed his neck as she pointed to a ridge. "Here's where we break their momentum," she murmured, her voice soft but firm. The warmth of her closeness seeped through his suit, and for a moment, the war room faded. There was only her, the faint scent of her skin like spice and storm, the curve of her jaw inches from his. His hand faltered on the controls, a tremor he couldn't hide. "Scared of a few bugs, Kane?" she teased, her lips twitching into a half-smile, her crimson eyes glinting with mischief. He swallowed hard, his voice dropping to a husky whisper. "Not the bugs making me shake, Zara." The air between them crackled, a current neither acknowledged aloud, but both felt deep in their bones. Laura cleared her throat sharply, snapping them back to the task, but the moment lingered, a thread of heat stitched into the fabric of their growing bond. Later, in the dim confines of their assigned quarters, a cramped cabin with 2 narrow bunks, Jasper shed his jacket, the tension of the day heavy on his shoulders. Zara sat on the edge of her bunk, unfastening her gauntlets, revealing jade fingers marked with faint silver scars. She caught him staring and arched a brow. "Something on your mind, farmer?" "Just wondering how a Huntress ended up here," he said, leaning against the wall, his eyes tracing the lines of her hands, then drifting up to meet hers. "With me." She set the gauntlets aside, her movements deliberate, and stood, closing the small distance between them. "I came for a legend," she said, her voice low, resonant. "I found a man, and now perhaps something more." Her hand hovered near his chest, not touching, but the space between them burned. Jasper's breath hitched, his pulse a drumbeat in his ears. He wanted to close that gap, to feel the strength of her against him, but he held back, tethered by the weight of what lay ahead. "We've got a fight coming," he said, his tone rough with restraint. "Let's see it through first." Zara's lips curved, a promise in her smile. "Then we fight, Kane, together." And in her eyes, he saw not just a warrior, but a partner, one he hadn't known he needed until she'd stormed into his world. The Crixan came with the dawn, their ships tearing through Alara 9's atmosphere like jagged wounds against the amber sky. 3 monstrous hulks, hulking amalgamations of scavenged metal and pulsing organic flesh, descended with a shriek that shook the crimson fields. From the bridge of the eclipse, Jasper watched through the tactical display, his hands clenched into fists. Beside him, Zara stood tall, her silver armor gleaming under the sterile lights, her crimson eyes fixed on the enemy with a hunter's focus. The plan was set: lure the Crixan into the valley, trap them, and bury them under fire from above. But plans, Jasper knew, rarely survived first contact. Enemy vessels entering weapons range, a tactical officer called, his voice taut but steady. "Landing craft deployed. ETA to surface, 10 minutes." Jasper nodded, his jaw tight. Launch Operation Red Snare. All units to positions. His voice carried the weight of command, a tone he hadn't used in years, dredged up from the ashes of Iron Valley. The Eclipse sprang to life, its fleet of smaller ships fanning out in precise arcs, guided by Zara's disciplined formations. On the hologram, green dots, Alliance craft, formed a net around the valley, leaving a deliberate gap to funnel the Crixin toward the bait. A stockpile of Z-12 Jasper had rigged with explosives at the valley's heart. "They're taking it," Zara said, her breath steady as the red blips shifted course, drawn to the mineral's siren call. Their hunger blinds them. But the Crixin were no mindless swarm. As their largest ship breached the atmosphere, it veered sharply, splitting its landing craft toward a secondary site, a plateau half a kilometer from the trap. Jasper cursed under his breath. "They're adapting faster than we thought." Zara, she was already at the controls, adjusting the display with swift precision. "Contingency Theta," she said, her voice cutting through the rising chaos. "Redirect the western flank to push them back into the valley." He relayed the order, and 2 Alliance frigates broke formation, their cannons roaring as they intercepted the stray craft. The maneuver worked. One ship crashed in a plume of fire, but at a cost. The second frigate took a direct hit, its hull rupturing in a silent bloom of debris. "Evac ordered," an officer reported. 60% crew loss. Jasper's stomach churned, the ghosts of Iron Valley whispering in his ears. "They're hitting the ground off target," another voice cut in. "Landing sites 2 clicks from a Z-12 zone." Commander Laura Voss turned to him, her steel eyes sharp. "If they dig in outside the valley, we lose the advantage. Orbital strikes won't contain them." "Then we meet them down there," Jasper said, his voice hard with resolve. "Prep a strike team. Zara, and I lead it." Laura's frown deepened. "That's not protocol, Kane. We need you up here, running the show." "With respect, Commander," he shot back. "No one knows that terrain like I do. No one's fought these bastards up close like I have." He glanced at Zara, who stepped forward, her presence a quiet storm. "The Vera teach that leaders must sometimes wield the spear themselves," she said, her tone unshakable. "This is that time." Laura studied them, then gave a curt nod. "Fine. Constant comms, and you pull out if it goes sideways. Go." 30 minutes later, Jasper dropped from a shuttle onto a Lara 9 surface, the impact jarring his bones as he landed in a clearing shrouded by thorn trees. Zara hit the ground beside him, her silver armor now streaked with dust, a dozen Alliance soldiers fanning out in their wake. He'd swapped his officer's uniform for lightweight combat gear, flexible, scarred from old battles, familiar as a second skin. Zara's blade hung at her hip, augmented with an Alliance comm unit clipped to her chest. She caught his eye as they moved, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "Regretting the dirt life yet, farmer?" He grinned despite the tension, adjusting his plasma rifle. "Just thinking how far we've come since you tried to skewer me in my own field." Her laugh was brief, a flash of light in the gathering dark. Worth the challenge. They advanced through the forest, the air thick with the tang of ozone and the distant rumble of Crixin ships settling into the soil. Through the trees, Jasper glimpsed his farmhouse, a squat silhouette against the red horizon, a beacon of the life he'd fought to keep. "Strike team, form up," he ordered, his voice low over the comms. "Standard perimeter, weapons hot. These things are tough, but they bleed." The first Crixin drones met them at a ravine's edge, towering insectoid horrors, their black shells gleaming, legs like scythes slashing through the underbrush. Jasper fired, plasma bolts searing into their hides, while Zara danced between them, her blade a silver blur. She severed a limb with a single stroke, her movements fluid, lethal, a predator in her element. The soldiers held formation, their shots disciplined under her bark commands. "Tighten the line. Unity is our strength." The skirmish was brutal but swift, the drones collapsing in heaps of twitching limbs. But as they neared the main landing site, Jasper's breath caught. The Crixin weren't just landing, They were burrowing, their claws churning the earth, seeking the Z-12 veins beneath. "They're already digging," he said, his voice grim. "If they tap the deposit, we're done." Zara's eyes narrowed, scanning the chaos. "We draw them off," she said. "Force them to chase us instead." She pointed to a ridge overlooking the site, its crest jagged with rock. "There, we hold them from above." The team scrambled up the slope, setting up a firing line behind natural cover. Jasper crouched beside Zara, their shoulders brushing as they aimed down at the swarm. "They're forming a perimeter," he said, surprise lacing his tone. "That's new. They didn't defend like this in the valley." "They learn," Zara replied, her voice steady. "So must we." She adjusted her stance, her thigh pressing briefly against his, a fleeting warmth that sent a jolt through him despite the battle's roar. "Surprise them, King." He nodded, a plan sparking. "Team, change of play. Zara and I flank from the rear. You hold this ridge, suppressing fire only. When we signal, hit their diggers hard." Laura's voice crackled over the comms, sharp with doubt. "A two-man infiltration? That's suicide." "Two people who know what they're doing move quieter than a squad," Jasper countered. "We're out of time, Voss." After a tense pause, she relented. 15 minutes. Then we bomb it, with or without you." They slipped down the ridge's far side, moving through the brush with a synchrony born of instinct. Jasper led, his rifle ready, while Zara shadowed him, her blade silent at her side. Years apart, worlds apart, yet their steps matched as if they'd fought together a lifetime. At the perimeter's edge, he signaled a halt, crouching low. "Before we go in," he said, his voice a rough whisper, "I need you to know something." Zara turned, her crimson eyes searching his, a question in their depths. "Speak, Kane." "When this is over," he said, the words spilling out raw and unpolished, "I want to rebuild that farm with you. Not just a place to grow grain, but a home. Our home." Her breath hitched, a rare crack in her composure. A smile bloomed across her jade features, fierce and tender at once. "Are you binding yourself to me, Jasper Kane?" she asked, her tone half teasing, half serious. He chuckled, the sound tight with nerves. "Guess I am. Not sure how Vera do it, though. With ritual combat, blood oaths, and a feast that lasts days," she said, her eyes dancing. Then she softened, leaning closer. "But I take your ways, too." Their lips met in a brief, fierce kiss, a clash of need and promise, tasting of dust and desperation. Then they pulled apart, weapons raised, and plunged into the fray. The Crixin site was a nightmare of motion, drones hauling glittering soil to their ship, their claws churning the earth into a frenzy. "On my mark," Jasper whispered over the comms. 3, 2, 1 now." The ridge erupted with gunfire, a storm of light and sound, while Jasper and Zara struck from behind. He targeted the diggers, plasma bolts melting their machinery, while she carved through the drones, her blades singing with each kill. Caught in the crossfire, the Crixin faltered, their hive mind scrambling. Then the ground buckled. A massive Z-12 deposit burst free beneath the ship, its eerie blue glow bathing the scene. Drones swarmed it, their forms twisting as they absorbed the mineral, growing larger, sharper. "We need to bury it," Jasper shouted. "Voss, call the strike now." "Negative," Laura snapped. "You're too close." "Do it," he roared, grabbing Zara's arm. "Run." They sprinted as the sky screamed, orbital rounds raining down in a cataclysm of fire. The blast threw them forward, Jasper shielding Zara as they tumbled into a ditch. Dust and flame swallowed the world, the Crixin ship reduced to a smoldering crater. When the haze cleared, they lay tangled in the shallow stream below, battered but alive. Above, the remaining Crixin ships retreated, their red blips fading from the Eclipse's scanners. "Did we win?" Zara asked, her voice hoarse as she pushed herself up, water dripping from her hair. Jasper checked his wrist display, a grin breaking through the grime on his face. "They're running." "Yeah, we won." They staggered to their feet, leaning on each other, bruised and triumphant. As they limped toward the rendezvous, The scorched edge of his farm came into view, the fields blackened, the house scarred but standing. "Sorry about your land," Zara said, her hand tightening on his arm. He looked at her, the woman who'd fought beside him, and smiled. "Land heals. And 12 makes damn good soil once you tame it." 3 months after the Crixin fell, the crimson fields of Alara 9 began to heal. The scorched earth, once a graveyard of ash and ruin, now sprouted fresh dusk-grained stalks, their pearl-like seeds catching the light of the triple suns. Jasper stood on the rebuilt porch of his farmhouse, the wood still smelling of fresh-cut timber, his hands wrapped around a chipped clay mug. The valley stretched before him, alive with the hum of life, a testament to stubborn hope and hard-won peace. His farm was no longer just a refuge. It had become something greater, a bridge between worlds. The Alliance, grudgingly impressed by the victory, had granted Jasper's request to establish a training outpost on his land. Young recruits, human and Vera alike, now dotted the fields, their laughter and clashing blades mingling with the rustle of grain. Zara had taken to teaching them, her silver armor a beacon as she demonstrated the fluid strikes of her people's combat forms. Jasper watched her from the porch, a quiet pride swelling in his chest. She moved like a storm-given form, fierce and untamed, yet there was a gentleness in her now, a warmth that hadn't been there when she'd first arrived, blade drawn, to challenge him. The battle had changed them both. For Jasper, it had been a reckoning, not just with the Crixin, but with the ghosts of Iron Valley that had haunted him for a decade. He'd fought not to destroy, but to protect, and in Zara's crimson gaze, he'd found a reason to keep fighting. For her, the victory had rewritten the laws of her exile. The Vera elders, informed of her role in saving Alara 9, had offered her a path home, but she'd chosen to stay. "My honor lies here," she told them, her hand resting on Jasper's arm, a gesture that spoke louder than any oath. That evening, as the suns dipped below the horizon and the 3 moons rose, casting a silver veil over the valley, Jasper found Zara on the hill overlooking the farm. She'd shed her armor for one of his old shirts, the loose fabric hanging off her jade shoulders, revealing the smooth curve of her collarbone and the faint silver scars that marked her as a warrior. The sight stirred something deep in him, a warmth that wasn't just desire, but a longing for something lasting, something whole. "You're staring, Kane," she said without turning, her voice carrying a teasing lilt as she gazed at the fields below. He stepped closer, the grass crunching under his boots, a grin tugging at his lips. "Can't help it. You look better in my shirt than I ever did." She turned then, her crimson eyes catching the moonlight, their glow softened by a rare vulnerability. "Flattery from a farmer," she murmured, stepping toward him until they were mere inches apart. "I thought you preferred honesty." His breath hitched as her scent enveloped him. Spice and storm, wild and intoxicating. "All right, honest it is," he said, his voice dropping to a husky whisper. "I've been thinking about you all day. About us. About what comes next." Her lips parted, a faint flush spreading across her jade cheeks, a hue that made his pulse quicken. She reached out, her fingers grazing his chest, lingering over the steady thump of his heart. "In my culture," she said, her voice low, resonant, "warriors celebrate victory in private ways, ways that honor the life they've fought for." Jasper's hand found hers, his calloused fingers intertwining with her smooth ones, the contrast sending a shiver through him. "And here," he said, leaning closer, his breath warm against her ear, "we've got our own ways of celebrating. Want to find out?" Her smile was a spark in the dark, fierce and inviting. "Show me, Jasper Kane." They walked back to the farmhouse, the night wrapping around them like a cloak. The door creaked shut behind them, and the world outside faded, leaving only the silver light that slipped through the shutters, painting their shadows on the wooden walls. Inside, the air grew heavy, charged with a quiet intensity. Jasper's hand found the small of her back, pulling her close, and she pressed against him, her strength matching his, her warmth a fire that burned away the last of his doubts. Their movements were slow at first, tentative, a dance of warriors testing new ground. Her fingers traced the scars on his arms, each touch a question answered by the press of his lips against her jaw, her throat, the pulse that raced beneath her jade skin. The shirt slipped from her shoulder, pooling at her feet, and his breath caught at the sight of her, strong, radiant, a vision of power and grace. She tugged at his belt, her eyes never leaving his, a silent challenge that he met with a low, hungry laugh. The moonlight wove their shadows into one, a tapestry of whispers and sighs. No words were needed. Every touch, every shudder spoke of a bond forged in battle and tempered in trust. Their breaths mingled, quick and uneven, as they surrendered to the rhythm of the night, a ritual as old as the stars above. The world beyond the walls ceased to exist. There was only this moment, this closeness, this unspoken vow that they were no longer two, but one. When dawn broke, soft and golden through the window, they lay tangled in the sheets, the air still warm with the echo of their union. Sweat glistened on Zara's skin, her crimson eyes half-lidded, a contented smile curving her lips. Jasper traced a finger along her cheek, marveling at the woman who'd stormed into his life and stayed to build a home. Worth fighting for, he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. She nestled closer, her laugh a melody against his chest. Worth everything, farmer. As the suns climbed higher, they rose to face the day, hand in hand, their farm a beacon of hope under the endless sky of Alara. The field stretched before them, red and alive, a promise of tomorrows they'd face together, warriors, lovers, keepers of the land.